Alright, so today I'm going to go over some oil painting basics, and I'll be giving a demonstration on the wipeout method. So right here I have my palette, which is currently in use with a full set of all of my favorite colors. And what you'll be needing today is a similar type of palette, and this is basically just ratty old palette paper sitting inside my nice palette keeper. This is a Masterson. Get it in the camera angle. Not quite, there we go. So this is my blue lid. You can pick one of these up at Michael's or any art store really. They're very handy, so you can seal and cover your palette, which I really like, to keep the paints fresher and also to keep the smell down. So you'll need palette paper. One of my big pet peeves is that people just tear off a piece of palette paper and just kind of sit it on their chair or their desk or something. Just keep it on the pad. It's better to have some thickness to the palette paper. If you choose to have a glass or wooden palette, that's fine too. I don't personally use those. The glass is a little too fragile for me, and the wood is a little harder to clean. And I generally I'm not a big fan of really disposable things, but the palette paper is good because, as you can see here, this is a section of mixing area that I reuse, and I basically clean off the palette at the end of each painting session, and I wipe it down with some paper towels. You'll notice that I use a lot of these blue paper towels, and I'm going to mess up everything if I pull out that whole wad there. So these are basically shop towels. You can get them at Pep Boys or AutoZone. I like them because theoretically they're supposed to be a little bit less linty than regular paper towels. And I do like to use paper towels for soaking up excess solvent and things like that. And then I use them to death, and then I dispose of them safely. You can also use the rags, which I recommended for today. So either shop towels like these blue ones or cotton rags. So we have palette, we have towels or cotton rags. I also have nitrile gloves on, which is really good for today since we'll actually be using our hands and our finger to make contact with the paint. You don't normally need to glove up to do any oil painting if you're careful. If you're really messy, I recommend gloves. For the basic earth tone palette, a lot of the older, more traditional paint colors, like the umbers and siennas and the ochres, they're not as dangerous, basically, if you get them on your skin. So for the first few weeks, there's really no danger, but once we get into a few of the other heavy metal pigments, like the cadmiums and the cobalts and things like that, you don't really want them to have contact with your skin. At least not for very long. So if you don't wear gloves, you get it on your hands, just make sure you wash your hands. So palette, rags, gloves. The other big ticket item is the GAM saw. Sorry that this angle's really crappy here. We have GAM saw. This is highly important. This is the solvent. This is the thinner. If you're used to water-based mediums, this is basically what will clean off and water down your paint. As far as I know, it's pretty neutral. It doesn't speed up or slow down paint drying, but you do need it to. Some people choose to paint with just oil paint and a thinner. There are other thinners out there. There are ones that are even safer than this one, and there are ones that are a lot less safe. For example, Terpenoid is one. They have Terpenoid, which is blue and white can, and then they have Terpenoid Natural, which is like green, with trees on it or something. There's other more dangerous things, the actual paint thinner. You don't want to use anything that's less safe than Gamsol. I don't personally recommend using even Terpenoid at this point because the Gamsol is so much better. It's so much less odorous, I'd say. And you will notice a difference immediately if you have one of those other solvents. So the Gamsol is kept in this container here, nice size 1-liter bottle that it comes in. This will last a really long time. So Gamsol is the type of thing that you can actually use and reuse over and over again. I happen to use one of these silicoil jars, which are also pretty affordable. I think they're only like $11. So what this is, it's just a glass jar, and inside there's a metal spring. And what you do is you glide your brush along this spring, and you can kind of push down and touch the solvent, and it helps separate the bristles so that you have more effective cleaning, essentially. And it also is raised up. The reason for the spring is so that it is raised up above where the area where a lot of the sediment collects, so that you're not making contact with that each time you put your brush in, and therefore muddying your brush up each time. So it's also a really nice jar. This, I've only bought, I think, 3 of these in my lifetime. This is my 3rd one. The reason I replace them is because sometimes it just gets so coagulated at the bottom that it's really hard to clean. And also the lid gets a little funky after a few years. It gets a little concaved. So this is a silicoil jar. There are other ones that you can get that are similar. If you have anything that's the equivalent, that's also fine. You don't have to use a fancy jar. You can use just any jar, but it must be metal or glass. It can't be plastic. Over time, like I said, even the lid on this gets caved in, so the chemicals will affect plastic, even if it's not immediate. So I recommend usually things like salsa jars, but that have they're usually about this size. You just want to clean them out really well first and dry them with paper towels. Make sure you get all the food out of it, and then you can fill it up with the Gamsol. It's a good idea to have more than one jar going on at the same time, and that's circling back to the reusable nature of the Gamsol. That's it has to do with how it settles out. So basically, every time you use your Gamsol, it will get cloudy as soon as you start working your brush and cleaning your brush. And then by the end of the day, if you're done painting, it will start to settle out to the bottom. And it's kind of like, if you've ever seen like a gravy separator, everything will go to the bottom. All of the liquid at the top should be perfectly clear, almost completely clear. And what you can do is actually pour off that clear into a fresh jar, and then after you pour out the clear part of the Gamsol, what's at the bottom is the sediment, and you can wipe that out with paper towels and dispose of that safely. I'm not going to talk about disposal just yet today. I just don't want to get too off topic. So we have our silicoil jar or some other type of jar with a lid. Like I said, salsa jar or something about that size is good. The next thing we're going to need is medium. Get that in there. New McGilp is my choice for medium. And a lot of new students just don't know why and when to have mediums involved. And for purposes of this class, normally we have everyone use this while we're in the school building and trying to work quickly week to week on different oil paintings. Oil paint takes longer than a week if you don't use any type of agent to help it dry. Many times it will take too long to dry, basically. So this is a type of medium that not only helps your paint kind of glide and blend smoothly, but it also speeds up the drying. So in thin layers, when you just a little dab of this on your brush, your painting, if you're working very thinly, can dry within a few hours, and definitely overnight. Now, if you're working very thick impasto type of brush strokes, you're going to have it be longer than that, probably 24 to 48 hours, but it's still going to be way faster than if you didn't use any medium whatsoever. There are a lot of other mediums, and if you have a question about a particular type of one, just send me an email and ask me about it. A common other one that I personally used when I was learning painting was linseed oil, which is actually a slow drying additive that you can use. It smells really nice, and it's actually what the paints are made of. So it's just ground up pigment mixed with linseed oil. That's all oil paint really is. Sometimes I think they're mixed with other things besides linseed oil, but I think the majority of the time is linseed oil. But again, that will slow it down. That will slow down drying time. So for today, we have our palette set up. We have a canvas here, and mine is a little bit bigger. I think this is like a 12 by 12 maybe, or something like that size. You can use an 8 by 10. You can use canvas panels. I actually just didn't have any on hand. I have a ton at the school building, but I didn't bring any of those home with me, and I'm not allowed to go down there. I'm only teaching you guys remotely this semester. So if you use regular canvas with the wood stretchers, you can run into some trouble with those because they can get dented or they can get floppy. Sometimes people in class have issues where they're kind of see-through, where the light's hitting the back of them. But we can handle those problems on a case-by-case basis. So I have my canvas or canvas panel. You can use other types of boards and whatnot. Like you can use gessoed masonite. It's not preferable, but it will work. What my still life is on over here is gessoed masonite. And you can also use just gessoed birch plywood, which is okay. All of these other things are definitely options, but the quickest grab and go and also cheapest are the canvas panels, and they're great for learning. The only tricky part is that if you actually do a really nice painting on one of them, they're hard to frame. They're a little bit harder because of the thickness. But for right now, just have any sort of canvas or canvas panel to get started. And for those of you that are experienced, sorry if this is going to go really slow, but I just wanted to take it slow for all the people that are not experienced, just in case you guys had questions. So the only color we really need for this method is just umber of either kind. So right here we have burnt and raw umber. And I usually don't make a designation which one you use. They're very similar, and paint color varies in subtle ways from brand to brand. And the quality varies from brand to brand too, but overall, burnt umber is a warmer color than raw umber. Raw umber is a bit more, I'd say, on the greener side, and burnt umber is on the redder side. So I like raw umber. I feel like it's a little bit more neutral, being that it's a brown that's on the greener side versus a brown that's on the redder side. So that's just a little too warm for me. If I'm going to go with burnt umber, I might as well just go with some sienna. So I use raw umber. And I do have some tools that I've acquired over the years. So this is my Gamblin 1980, and I haven't used it in a while, so it is really hard to open. So you can see here. So what I have, this is my painting vice grip. You don't need to have this. If you have any kind of pliers or any kind of tool, if you have brand new paint, you're not going to have this problem, but at some point you might have a paint tube that does not want to open, and just grab pliers. Honestly, the vice grip works really well because it's kind of gentle, and you can set it up to not over squeeze the lid, and it just does a really nice job without a lot of pressure. Now we have, just going to use this corner of my palette, and I would go with maybe a dollop that's like a nickel size for today. Just remember, you can always squeeze out more paint, but it's really hard to get it back in the tube. Especially the more expensive paints, just make sure you always squeeze out. Start with like a pea size amount, like a petite pea. So there's my raw umber. You'll notice that I was kind of just showing you guys, but I keep my cap, my lid on my jar until I'm really ready to use it. If I have to run away for any reason to go to the bathroom or to get a drink, all you have to do is just set the lid on top of your Gamsol. You really will notice a difference right away. Now, it has an odor, and if it's the only type of smell that you ever tried to smell for a thinner for oil painting, it might seem like it's pungent to you, but by comparison to the other options, it's very mild. If you have the Neo McGilp, just give it a shake. Mine's a little old, so it's a little bit more goldeny. And you'll notice that, oh, I think I tossed it. I had an old one around here, and it was really below amber colors. So just give it a little shake, and make sure you just put the cap on really tight because it gets really crusty around the top and then it gets really hard to open. So I'm going to put some, trying to put things where you can see them. And maybe like a quarter-size dollop there. You can see it there. That's my neon mint gilp, and that's my raw umber. And ignore all of those. Mine does not want to close. Might be time to replace that one. Okay. And last but not least, our brushes. I've had this one for a long time. This is a natural bristle flat. It's by Utrecht. It's about 1 inch. It says it's a 12. Don't trust. I don't give out numbers for brush sizes because they're different for each brand, basically. Those are proprietary numbers for each type of brush. Now this was a flat, I think. It says flat somewhere. Nope, it doesn't. So basically a flat is a square tip brush, and mine is turning into a filbert, which you'll see sometimes over time will happen. Let's see if I have an actual filbert here. This is an actual filbert. This is one of my other favorites here. This is also Utrecht brands. These nice black ones with, they have different colors. I'm not sure what the different colors mean, but this is an actual filbert tip. So that slight curve to the top. You'll see other ones that are like this. You say, what's that? Not a flat. And they're a shorter bristle, so this is a bright, I believe. So instead of it, if this were a flat of the same kind, the bristles would be kind of double the length. And this one's a bright, so it's a lot shorter. So I suggest to people to use flats and a few rounds, but definitely more flats than rounds. You'll come to instances where you'll need to have a round, but I'm a big pusher of using your largest brush for as long as possible through your painting. You're just going to be able to get a better grasp of like brush mechanics and how you can use the brush in certain ways to do something that's complex in reality, but with practice, your brush can take care of multiple things with one stroke. That's at least the goal that we're all aiming for. So simplicity, and kind of like mixed with magic, a little bit of brush magic going into it. So you need to practice by forcing yourself to use the larger brush for as long as possible. If you feel like you really can't get into that nook or cranny that you're trying to get to, you need to go down a size, that's fine, but go down incrementally. Don't skip to like a tiny brush. Always go down to the next size. So this would be the next size for me. So I have this larger 1 inch one, and this one's maybe, I'd say it's a little closer to 3/4 of an inch, and this is another. It says it's a bright. It's a little long though. And then, so I would definitely advise getting a few large natural bristle brushes, and I believe I put all of this into the supply list, but this is definitely more detail. So some more natural bristle ones that are on the larger side, and then you can get some synthetics for some smaller details, things like this. And if you don't know, well, this one's all ratty at the end, but the difference, I think this, okay, so this is a brush that was a long-handled brush. It's a good segue. And then I needed to do detail work with it, and so I snapped off the end, and it looks like it got chewed on by a gerbil, but I sanded it down just so it wasn't going to give me splinters. So I turned it into a short handle. The long handle versus short handle, this is for work that's upright, kind of on a desk. So short handle's not my makeshift one, and then the long handle's for standing up and working at an easel. So it's okay if you have some long handle and some short handle. It's not a big deal. The idea with the long handle one is that you can kind of inch your hand back on the brush, and giving you a little bit more range of motion with that. So a good assortment, I can give you guys a visual here of what a good assortment would be. Brushes. Some options here. Do something like that. And I definitely have a lot more smaller brushes than this, but I think for the, we're not going to get into too much detail just yet. So when it's about 1 inch, I have a natural bristle. I have, throwing all my brushes, it's pickup sticks time. So I have this synthetic filbert, which I just like the shape of. I have a synthetic round long handle. I have a synthetic flat that's getting down there in size. It's about, I'd say, 1/4 to 1/2 of an inch. And then a few, I think these are natural bristle flats or brights that are about 1/4 of an inch in width there. So that's a good, this is plenty, honestly. You should be able to do a whole painting with just 3 brushes, given they're the right appropriate size for the scale that you're working at, which is also a factor. But these are good brushes for 8 by 10 canvases and up. So you were going to go smaller, I would recommend a lot of smaller brushes, like something like these. But we're not just there yet. Okay. So I'm going to start off, finally get to painting here, with my nice Utrecht natural bristle. And I have my still life here. It's all white objects, except for my little steel mug there. I have an egg, a box. It's actually a little box of soap, and it was like a perfect rectangular shape. So I'm going to show you guys my palette as I'm working, so you can see how often I'm dipping into things, and also how often I'm kind of cleaning my brush. I have all these used up paper towels here. So the first thing you want to do with this method is to just kind of coat the canvas. And you want to do it with, obviously, some paint. So I'm dipping into my umber, but first I dipped my brush into the solvent to get it a little moist. And then I really pressed out a lot of the excess thinner onto the paper towel. And now, if you can see here, as I press, you'll be able to gauge when you're looking at like your towel or your rag, if you have too much thinner in your brush. If you press, you can kind of see it like the way when you squeeze a sponge and you see the water kind of come out in a similar way through the bristles, and you can gauge how much thinner is on your brush that way. So I have just thinner on my brush, and for this method I don't want to use too much, but I definitely want to dab a little bit so that it dries of the Neo McGilp. If you use too much Neo McGilp, you're going to have a harder time doing this method, but since this is a first step in a progression of lectures about painting, you should get in the habit of just learning to add some Neo McGilp to your brush as you paint. Alright, so I'm just kind of mixing a little spot here on the palette, getting a little bit more thinner. Since this is going to be my initial coating, some people call it tinting or toning the canvas, I'm going to start to put it on. And sometimes people will run into issues where they use too much thinner, and you'll see here that it starts to kind of, I call it raining down. If your thinner is making the paint kind of run down like a waterfall, that's a little too much thinner. It should shift slightly, but you should be able to physically see it running down. That's just going to be a slippery mess for you underneath, which is another good reason to have a little bit of the Neo McGilp on there. So to solve that, just let it kind of, you can spread it out a little bit. If it's really, really full of thinner, then you can take a rag and just kind of wipe it off a little bit. So I'm going to actually just add more paint. And it's a good idea to just see how far your paint can go without adding too much more. So what we're doing here is putting a middle tone on the canvas, just like when you work with toned charcoal paper. And so we'll have basically out of a range of 1 to 10, you'll have like a 5 to start with. It's a good idea to kind of rotate with canvas just to get all the corners. One pet peeve of mine is when people paint or work around like the clips on, if you guys had me last semester, you'll know I asked you to kindly just don't let those spots be untouched. Just fill it in. If you need to unclamp for a second, do it. Then you can put it back. There's a hair in there. Okay. So this isn't the darkest that your painting's going to get. This is just, like I said, a middle tone. Just going to let it rest for a second. And then you might have the desire to go smaller right away with your brush choice, but just stick with it. Just keep the biggest brush for as long as you can through the painting. You can always go backwards too if you feel the need. Alright, so I have my still life here. I'm going to try and keep myself in one spot. And what I'm first going to do is give myself an idea of scale. So just like if you were drawing a person's head, you'd put a mark. First mark on the canvas should be a mark for the top of the head and the bottom of the chin, just to give you an idea of how that head's not going to get any larger than those 2 marks. So the same thing here. So I'm going to look at the right side of my box and then the left side of the little cup. And this is just giving me some control for the scale. Now, since I chose the left and right sides because my still life is wider than it is tall, so I just figured that would be better than trying to adjust, choose a height and then adjust the width, because I could be way off with that. So at first, I'm just going to go with the width, and if your still life is on the taller side, you can go with the height to mark off the height first. Okay, got a little bit more paint on there. And just basic measuring techniques. I'm looking for, like, the halfway point kind of is going right through the egg. So if this is my halfway point through my canvas, the egg is going to be somewhere in here. Now, I don't have a good idea of the height of everything yet, so I'm going to need to do some more building and marking before I can estimate the proper height for everything. So I have my box. It's okay to make mistakes. It's really, really okay. And I've got a close call here with my top of my mug's cylinder. I'm not using a sighting stick of any kind, but what I suggest for people to do, it's like a rookie thing to do, is to just kind of, I'm gonna fill in the blank on the space. For example, the surrounding area for this still life, like the little platform that I have it sitting on, is another or more points of registration for me to get the sketch right. So if you sit there and say, I'm going to let the background just kind of bleed out, I'm going to make up the background or something like that, you might have opportunities you're missing to help you get things just right with your drawing if you skip over them. Okay, so this is super duper loose, possibly incorrect in many spots, but I'm just going to keep moving forward, making my adjustments here and there. I'm looking for similarities, things that are lining up. The first thing I noticed that was a little bit of a close call was the top of my little mug and the corner of the box here. I don't have anything level to, let's see what I can find. I do have a skewer here. Yeah, I think that from my position, this corner, the top of the cylinder here is higher than the corner of the box. And I am seeing my little platform is on a slight tilt towards me. Very makeshift situation here for my studio, but it's almost giving the objects a 3-point perspective. So I can go ahead and push that, exaggerate it a little bit. This will give a real feeling of closeness to the objects for the viewer. Okay, and the one thing I haven't painted in yet is the handle. Which is almost mirroring the curve of the egg. And at this stage, it's a good idea to sketch in cast shadows. It's getting a little mushy here. Mine is, the solvent is still kind of spreading a little bit, so each brush stroke I make, it's not making a lot of permanent mark yet. It's not sticking, so to speak. So the more I work it without adding either paint or thinner, the more it's just gonna kind of start to blob out. So hence why we will move to the next step very soon. Some weird, almost feels like that handle's in the wrong spot, but we'll see. Okay, so feeling like the egg and the bottom of the little mug, they're more level than I have. So I'm going to bring the egg up just a little bit. I think that's going to make the egg very happy. And then this box. There we go. Move some things around. Alright, so the whole reason it's called the wipeout method is what it sounds like. You take your hand on a rag, and you can probably double up, and this is like old cotton, fabric. So I doubled it up, but again, I do have gloves on, so you might get some seeping through. And you can start without dipping into thinner, but if you dip into the thinner just a little teeny tiny touch, you're going to have an eraser at your fingertips, literally. So a little touch, and you're going to start to reveal another value for you to work with. And I'm not just kind of looking just at my painting, I'm still looking at the reference, because I'm trying to make those corrections at the same time I'm making value adjustments. I'm going to go for the lightest values that I can see that I can generalize with a fingertip. Alright, so there's a cast shadow there. Always treat your surface that your objects are resting on. That's where your cast shadows are going to be, and your cast shadows are what are going to be key to you getting some realism. I think my mug needs to be somewhere around there, probably even lower. Alright. On my box, I have it lit so that I have a trio of values that are pretty distinguishable from each other. And this side facing the light is the lightest. I'm going to try and pull that one out first. And you'll see I'm just kind of moving my finger to different spots that have like some of the thinner on them, on the rag, so that I You can see here that where I've been using the rag, it's getting a little painty, so all I need to do is just kind of slightly move my finger to a spot where it's less painty. Now for me, my background is very dark above this, beyond this little platform that I made that my objects are sitting on. So I can let the silhouette kind of take over, and I'll probably add a dark value there. And my box is looking quite deep, so I'm probably gonna have to make some adjustments there. Alright, this is my darkest side, so I'm trying to not do too much lifting there so that I can start to build the values on that form. And I want it to go with something that was more of a simple white object, but the only straight cylinder that I had to think of was this mug. So I have some reflective areas. And the trick is with reflection is to paint what you see and understand that it's a reflection and think about what is reflecting in that object. For me, it's literally reflecting the egg, and it's reflecting the rest of the room and the piece of the easel behind it. Okay, bring them down there. My egg needs to get a lot smaller. Alright, so now I'm going to go back in with some more darker values. Now that I've cleaned it up a little bit, I could put some more marks down where things can go in the opposite direction. And again, still making the corrections as I'm doing this. I'm tightening up the drawing. Now there's a space here between the box and the mug. Trying to get that in. I think my egg is still too big. That's okay. I'm going to fudge the bottom of my mug's ellipse. Above all else, I want to keep my left and right boundary where I set them from the beginning. So if I have to make adjustments, I need to work inward. If I make adjustments in the opposite direction, I'm messing with the composition. So since you don't have much of a full value range, as full at least if you add, compared to adding white, the strengthening in this exercise is basically getting more precise. Pushing the values, getting them exactly where they need to be, and really honing in on the drawing and just kind of basic mechanics of painting. It's a really great first exercise without feeling too involved with mixing and that other heady aspect of painting. Getting colors and values right on the palette and then on the painting is something that gets better with more experience. So this is a really simple exercise. I'm constantly making comparisons as I sketch here. For example, how close is the top of the egg to this one edge of this plane here of the rectangle? And again, I seem to need it to shift everything upwards, making sure that the objects don't seem wider or taller than they should be. And it's just a constant back and forth with adding darks and then lifting out lighter areas. Now you can get back down to the canvas white, and to do that you want to have a freshly dipped finger with your rag, and you really do need to scrub a little bit with your finger. So kind of get the thinner on the canvas, and it will naturally kind of spread out in all directions, so you can shift to another spot on your rag and get an even cleaner edge after you've put some down already. For me, I kind of get a drawing going, and then once a single area starts working really well, I try to hone in on that area and then kind of move outwards, making corrections that suit that spot. That kind of contradicts my other statement about keeping in to the overall scale that I set out from the beginning, but the changes that I'm suggesting aren't gigantic changes that would change the overall scale. And remember that just like the end of last semester, we have things that we're not trying to work with line. You know, we're working with value. If it doesn't have an actual line for an edge, just let it be reliant on the value change for your viewer to see that it's the edge of an object and not an outline. So of course you have to sketch with something, so you will initially sketch with some line, but then do your best to eliminate it, and do that by selecting the right value. My cast shadow here is nice and curvy. The light isn't terribly close to the still life, so it's pretty fuzzy, and it's really noticeably getting fuzzier as the egg shadow goes towards the left side here. Just be conscious of those things that you should already know about. The mechanics of the cast shadow is what I'm referring to. Let's see how much later I can get. Now, if you take this process too slowly and you use too much neo-McGilp, you're going to have problems getting back to the white of the canvas. But usually with some adjusting with your finger on the rag, keep manipulating it, and keep kind of redipping and getting a new spot, you're going to be able to get not the perfect white that the canvas was, but really, really, really close. The rectangle shape isn't great yet, but right now I'm not super concerned with perfection in every area. I'm attacking the piece as a whole, so I do want to continue to work around making small adjustments to the drawing and really impactful changes to the value. Now I see I'm probably going to want to grab a small brush eventually for this mug here. It's some of the details around the handle. and the lip, the edge there. It's pretty. There's a lot of little reflections that are going on. If it was a ceramic mug, you could probably get away with just continuing to use your bigger brush there. Pay attention to the things that are happening within the cast shadows too. It's just telling kind of a story of the lighting that's going on, and just be observant of that story. You know, you need to have an understanding of how much light there is in the room, what direction is it coming from, how many sources are there. And all it takes is observation, really, for you to get an understanding. I'm going to go in with some more dark. But again, I'm still kind of dipping in. I'd say I'm increasing the amount of Neo McGilp as I go along. Because at this point, I'm not going to be going over the areas, really, that I'm going to want to leave white. So I'm trying to just apply it to the areas that are going to stay dark. So I can feel a little bit more confident in putting that drying agent that is the Neo McGilp onto the canvas. Okay. Oops, a little runny. A little too much thinner there. I'm going to press some of that out. Try and load back up with something that's more paint heavy. And I don't go straight for like the darkest dark. I know it is super dark behind these objects, but number one, you're just going to need a whole lot of paint. And you don't need to go from 0 to 90 in a single layer with oil painting. It's better not to. It's going to dry better, and besides that idea of it drying better, it's going to be more control if you do things in layers. If you've ever worked in watercolor before, it's a similar approach. You know, it's this, you have safety in your in a multitude of layers versus trying to accomplish everything in fewer layers. What is going on there? Okay. Trying to get some paint here. What I need to do is firm up this edge, this dark value edge of the background. And I have some chunk of paint on the brush in a weird spot. Okay. I have a bit of a tangent here, so I'm going to actually cheat a little bit so I don't get that. The corner of this box was lined up with the little piece of masonite that they're resting on. Okay. Now, just like with the charcoal backgrounds from last semester, you're going to get a lot of pop and punch with a dark background, as most of your still lifes are lit with a strong light source. Then consequently your background is going to be a lot darker, and that's going to help achieve that one step towards the realism that we're aiming for. There's a bad ellipse there. I'll work on that guy. I'm going to push this down a little bit lower. And let that rise up there. And so some of the brush mechanics that you guys should be aware of, you can think of your brush as kind of like a broom, which it kind of is. So you're going to get the cleanest type of brushing if you have your brush perpendicular to your canvas. And what that means is you're going to scrape. You're actually going to like push the pigment away. instead of laying it down. So if you'd like to do more digging in and kind of going through layers that you've already laid down, or if you're just kind of putting first strokes down, it's good to have your brush perpendicular to your canvas. And as you go along and the thicker your strokes need to get, you're going to need to swivel your brush so it goes from being perpendicular and then swinging it to getting more parallel. So you can actually make brush strokes that are really, so my brush and my canvas in the two-dimensional sense are parallel to one another like this, and I'm going to be able to lay down almost like spackling the brush strokes on in this direction, and from this direction I'm going to do more cleaning and scraping. So it's kind of like from the perspective of the painter, like that. That's the direction. So if you want to do something in between, you kind of have like a 45-degree angle on how your brush is angled as you make contact to the canvas. Right now I'm focusing on the value relationships that everything has with its neighbor. My little box here does have a slight little flap there. Now, if you feel like you have enough paint down and you just need to smooth things out, what I'd actually recommend is just getting a clean dry brush and not going at it with any thinner or adding any paint or anything like that. So if you like to smooth things out, if you're that type of painter, or if you feel if you don't know if you're that type of painter yet, you can go ahead and use a dry brush. And let's see if I can give you an example here. Grab my nice synthetic filbert, still a good sized brush, and there's no paint on it whatsoever. I'm just going to see what I can do. A lot of soft kind of tickling. And you can use this as a means to lift out areas as well. But again, my brush is completely no thinner on it whatsoever. No other paint. Totally dry and clean brush. Just trying to mush around what's already on the canvas. My eggy needs to be a little bit more eggy shaped. And by doing this, I'm also kind of pushing edges a little bit more. So now we're at the stage where we're paying more attention to the edges. And if your brush is starting to get a little clogged up with paint, you could just, don't dip it into the thinner, just rub it on a rag or on your paper towel. Okay. I actually think that this whole foreground area needs to get a whole lot lighter. So I'm probably going to hit it up with the a wet rag and my finger again. I have my egg in the reflection here and some other craziness. I don't know. What am I looking at? I guess it's just a little corner there. Okay. And actually the cast shadow is lighter than the cup on this side. Let's try and get this ellipse corrected. Oh, yikes. Now, there's some little edges that are developing here. And basically there's still a lot of thinner and solvent that's getting pushed around by this brush, and it's gathering the pigment in some spots, and it's forming like a nice edge there. It's kind of on the bordering on too much of an outline, so I'll probably touch that later. But it's something that you can use in certain circumstances, like the edge where your form needs a slight edge to it that's more noticeable. Same thing here, the cast shadow from the egg is actually lighter than the mug, which is funny because this is just the reflection of this cast shadow in the mug, but it's darker on the mug. Okay. And I'm losing some information here, and this ellipse is too big. It needs to come in a little bit closer. I'm going to go back in with my rag and my thinner. And every time I go back in, I'm going to aim to touch up the same lightest spots first, just to be on the safe side. And because as you do this, your finger immediately starts to get paint on it through the rag, and therefore it becomes less bright the more you work it. A nice flip-flop of values on the egg here. So I have this value here on the platform is lighter as it meets the egg here. The curve of the egg comes around, there's a shadow under here on the egg's surface, but then the background, the platform is lighter than the egg, and then as soon as we rise a little bit above that, the egg is lighter than both of these shadow areas. If you find that your finger is too blunt an object, what you can do is stick the end of your paintbrush through the rag, and it's a much tinier little controlled tip for your eraser. It's a little bit more of a two-handed approach, but it works really well to get you some more precision on that big bumbling rag. You'll notice what seems to be a trading off of values with objects next to one another. It's kind of just illusion on our part, how values seem to be lighter or darker than one another. For example, what I was talking about here with the egg and the background being lighter, and then suddenly a switch and in reverse as you go a little bit above. But as long as you try and mimic that, you'll be on the right track. Again, just observing it is step number one in the right direction. Acknowledging that it's going on and making an attempt to honor that lighting. Still trying to work this platform up a little bit. Give it a little bit more free-form gradient down the bottom here. Don't feel the need to always make everything perfect or straight up and down strokes. It's much more interesting if it looks like a painting. And it looks unique, you know, to your hand. Now, the erasing with your rag is not the best tool for precision. You know, like the closest you can get, like I said, is using a paintbrush and inside the rag. But once you reach that maximum, you know, of detail, you do need to go in with some smaller brushes to start to smooth things out. And that's okay too. You can also use a paintbrush dipped in just thinner. That's definitely an option. I'm not quite there yet. And if you do that, you have to be really careful because the brush it's a lot harder to gauge how much thinner is on your brush versus like the spot on your rag, which you can clearly see and feel. And right now I'm just going to try and load up my big brush again to bring that value down again in the background. And you'll see them just by letting that first layer kind of rest there a little bit. I'm going to make much more traction doing it in small layers in terms of coverage versus, or multiple layers, not small layers. I think my ellipse is still a little funky here. brush strokes should also be something that, especially as you start to lay on more finalized strokes, they need to be reflecting of the cross-contour nature of the objects that you're painting, always. For example, the cylinder here has two basic directions. It has the vertical direction, which is a straight line, since it's a cylindrical object resting on the ground plane. So I could go vertically up and down, which feels right, but then you can also follow the curve of the elliptical nature of the whole piece. And those are the two directions that you should basically be going in. That's it. You can bend the rules, you can break the rules. These are suggestions, and they work for other painters, and I'm encouraging you to try them out. I knew this little mug was going to give me trouble. Okay. Here is the bottom of that rectangle. Squeezing that in there. I'm at the point. I'm at the point of going down, finally. I've done a lot. Majority of this painting has been with this big old brush and my finger. So I think I'm ready to go down a step. And you should feel like kind of a sense of ease and relief once you do that. If you don't feel that sense of relief, that means that basically you could have done more with that larger brush. Once you go down to that smaller brush size, you're like, oh yeah, now I can get at those little tiny spots I've been fighting with. That's what you should be feeling. And that's when you know you're kind of ready. So I'm going to go down to this guy, which is not exactly super small, but it's a synthetic and it has much cleaner edge. So I should be able to get more detail in there. And I'm not working with anything but the umber, so the only thing I can do is go dark or go light. If I need to adjust contrast, those are my two options. That's it. My brush has way too much thinner on it. It is a good idea to always kind of douse your brushes when you're first using them, unless you are doing some dry brushing. If you're about to load it up with paint, definitely dip it into the thinner, into the Gamsol first. This is going to kind of protect the bristles from getting kind of stained and getting too much paint stuck on. So this way, if you pre-wet your brush with some thinner, as soon as you change your brush, if you dip your brush into another paint color, you're going to have an easier time cleaning it off if it's kind of been preloaded with some Gamsol. Then I can help with my dry brush. Try to make some adjustments and soften some things out. This comes in very handy with the egg being such a smooth object. I think I would otherwise be pretty frustrated trying to do this alone with just just say the rag. Alright, now I'm going to jump down to get some little details. Like I said, my particular choice of subject matter has some pretty tight edges here, so I'm going to use my little stubby old natural bristle right here and try and pull out some of these tighter highlights and value shifts that I need to get to. And I keep bringing my brush over to my paper towel to just kind of clean it off. Okay, one of the other things that I do want to mention is to keep your darks transparent and your light areas opaque normally. So from here on out, after this exercise and the homework exercise, which is the same method of the wipeout technique, you always want to keep your darks as a value-wise dark, but transparent enough where you can see the texture of the canvas coming through. And then your light areas, anywhere where you're actually painting objects within an area of illumination, you can actually lay the paint on as thick as you'd like to. And this gives a really nice amount of subtle change in the shadow area, which is something that when the viewer looks at your painting, we interpret that as closer to realism. And then with the opaque lights, you really are saturating it and putting texture on, and this also kind of tricks the brain into seeing it as real. Just applying those two techniques is really helpful for a lot of painters and getting closer to realism. Alright, so I've done some good work here getting the details in there. Not much to say about that. Now I'm going in, kind of working a little bit backwards, getting the values to their final correct spot. Okay. I'm having a little trouble with the egg cooperating. actually going to try and use my finger here. Don't even have any thinner on this. I'm just trying to get more of a spherical value range. Pushing that. I think that's better. I was really trying to get a highlight there with some of the thinner, but wasn't able to get as light as I wanted, so I'm going to try one last effort here. Just remember that this is an exercise. You know, this does not have to be perfect. It's strictly meant for you either to learn and to have a good first experience in a simple way. And also for those of you that have painted with oil paint before, just kind of getting your feet wet. Back into it, you know. Something still a little lumpy about this egg. Moving on. Giving this mug a little soft cross contour brushing, just kind of mimicking the metal if I can attempt to. And then this top plane of the rectangle, I really had a nice trio of values here, but I feel like it wasn't represented well enough. I had this plane lightest, that in the middle, and this the darkest, but kind of neglected it a little bit. I'm just kind of switching my finger around the different spots on the rag as needed. And when I say as needed, just if I need a spot that has a little thinner on it, I move to a different spot that has thinner on the rag. And then if I need a spot that actually has some paint worked into the rag a little bit, I can use that as like a blending stump almost. And then also if I need like just a dry spot on the rag, so that I'm just not adding, I'm not really subtracting, I'm just softening. Well, I have a feeling I'm not going to be super happy with the egg no matter what, but the last thing I would like to do is to kind of hit up the darks a little bit more, especially around the mug area. Things are actually starting to tack up, which I'm fine with. So let me see if I can go in one last time with some darks. I'm going to be a little bit heavier with the paint. I'm not really using any thinner, just using the Neil McGilp, since these are little details. As a whole, the umber and the earth tone paints dry faster than a lot of the other paints anyway. So the idea of adding the Neil McGilp to them is just kind of makes how fast they dry like laughable. Oh, I think I need to check my ellipse sideways. There we go. Looks pretty good. Not amazing, but pretty good. I'm going to keep these highlights on either side of this rim. I'm really employing the technique of the angle of the brush here, since this is one of those really broom-like bristly brushes. I have the ability to scrape or lay down paint, depending on how I'm angling it, and I'm very conscious of it. It's hard to ignore, honestly. But if you're just getting started and someone needs to tell you that, can be a key manipulating tool that you can use. Not can, need to. A little bit of unevenness in the values in some spots. You're going to lose a little bit of control as things start to dry in certain areas and not others. I think that's okay. I think it's just part of it looking like a painting. So I say just go with it. And don't try and fight it too much, unless it's really a vital area. So by now all of my brushes have kind of been wet a few times and been loaded up with paint a few times, so I don't really have anything that's super clean or dry. I just have my softer brush here with some thinner on it, kind of seeing what else I can squeeze out of the lighter valued areas. I'm also trying to finesse some of the edges of these cast shadows. Just keeping in mind that they're going to soften as they get farther away from the object that's casting them, and get tighter and harder edged the closer to them. I find that the rag is a nice way to really even out an area. If you're having trouble with trying to use a brush to lighten up an area, or to darken an area, the rag does a good job of just kind of making everything homogenized. A few little touches left. Little points of interest, you could say. Trying to get this brush pretty clean. Alright, so this is basically all. I don't feel pressured. This is all I'm looking for in terms of achieving some clarity and detail. Single color, only working with the white of the canvas. So this is what you'll be working on all this week for today's class and for homework.